Welcome to part 2 of a 3-part series about race, health, and happiness in South Africa. As you know, we are bringing you a more international flavor for this season, and I was fortunate to visit Cape Town, South Africa, and interview some leaders on the ground. This interview is with Caroline Peters, who is an activist supporting women who experience gender-based violence. We discuss potentially triggering subject matter, specifically sexual abuse and assault. When we get to that section, there will be another warning and instructions on how to skip ahead and listen to the rest of the episode, which contains advice on how to overcome trauma and better support Black women and children. Overall, I hope you find the episode uplifting and inspiring. Welcome to the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast. We are learning together, not just to survive, but to thrive. And I am your host, Dr. O. Today, my guest is Ms. Caroline Peters, African feminist and human rights defender. She serves on the board of the Saartjie Baartman Center for Women and Children in Cape Town, South Africa, as well as being the executive director of the Callus Foundation. Ms. Peters, thank you for being on the podcast and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. O. Thank you for inviting me. I feel honored.
Oh, well, I'm extremely excited, especially since we are here in South Africa during the recording. So I'm really happy to meet you and, here on the motherland. So regardless of whether we are in Toronto or in the motherland, I always have to ask my question. And my favorite question is, what is your superpower?
I am people always say, I have the magic to connect people. So that takes some, you can phone me and wake me up at any time. Ask me who does any type of work here in Cape Town. I have not just Cape Town, locally, nationally, internationally. I have a network of women, of sisters, working in different spaces. So I am they always make fun of me because you can wake me up and say, who do I contact in Johannesburg if there's been an incident, or a sister that needs help in Johannesburg or wherever, which part of Cape Town or South Africa, in fact. So my superpower is networking.
Wow.
And really access to justice, access to services for women and children. I know who does what here in South Africa.
I love that. This is season 4, so I have done a lot of interviews and I've asked a lot of people that question, and I've never heard that one. And I think that is such a powerful superpower, and it makes sense, being an activist. I feel like being that connected again to the village, to the network, right? That is amazing to be able to create collective action and keep folks who are vulnerable safe.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. So yes. This makes sense. So, for our listeners, I know not everybody is always super on top of world history, but I do know that I think it is unlikely that anybody listening to this podcast is not aware of the history of South Africa, at least with regards to apartheid, which was such a brutal system of segregation, of cruelty, of oppression and colonization. In fact, in Canada, we know that when apartheid was created, South Africans actually came to Canada or studied some of the ways Indigenous people are treated in Canada, the way they were put on reserves that helped to inform how apartheid was structured. So my understanding is, in fact, those who wanted to bring about apartheid looked internationally at the most cruel and ways that colonizers had enforced different forms of segregation and then cooked up and baked apartheid. So that's the way I know it from a distance, and having, studied the history of Nelson Mandela as a child even. But the pales in comparison to somebody like you who lived during that time. So would you be able to tell me a little bit about your youth growing up during apartheid?
So like I said, I'm 58 years old now. So when I was a child, and like I said to you offline earlier, for me, even just being called a colored woman here in Cape Town is derogatory. It was what our colonializers segregated us by giving us terms such as colored. So coloreds were better than black people.
And what does colored mean?
Colored means a biracial couple had children and they are then called colored because our skin are fairer. So like you would call the yellow bone, in some people would say the yellow bone black people would be colored people, but colored bone would be biracial.
Okay.
So it would be a white mom and black dad, and or vice versa.
Now,
and
I think
that's how coloreds, yes.
And that's how you have coloreds. But I think we're going to have to dig a little bit deeper to define it for the audience, because I think some people are aware of people like Trevor Noah who talk about how he came to be, but him being biracial was illegal. So how do you come to have a whole class of people who are biracial?
So even
in
with
apartheid.
Yes, in apartheid, even with colored people could marry black people, but colored people could not marry white people. So the Immorality Act, and goodness, it was called the Immorality Act. It was immoral to sleep with a white man as a colored woman because you would be charged with the Immorality Act. You could be thrown into prison, and we've seen that happen. But for me, even just being termed a colored is derogatory. I don't like it. Where some colored people fight for being a colored, they would tell you, I'm not black, I'm colored, because segregation taught us that as colored people, we were a step ahead. So you would find whites, coloreds, black, Indians in South Africa. And so historically, I was born from the Cape Colored. If you look at my birth certificate even said nationality Cape Colored.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
And so this wasn't then just if your mom and dad were black or white. It looks like during apartheid, it was a whole, so we're talking about a whole class of people who had intergenerational mixing. Is that right? Like you had, we have something like that a little bit in Canada, like our Métis population are partially indigenous, partially white, but it's from generations ago. It's not just biracial immediate. Okay, so it's something like that.
So it's generations.
Generations, but mainly colored people. I guess, did that result in its own culture and language?
It did. So that's why even in Cape Town, we speak something. We have a Cape Town dialect that colored people have, a Cape Town slang. There's a colored slang. There's so even the food, the culture, the Cape Carnival, it's like the coons in like the Rio Carnival. We have the carnival here in Cape Town. It's a Cape Coon Carnival.
It's a separate culture.
So it's a separate culture.
But that came through segregation of apartheid, and you were sandwiched in there. So colored people had more rights than Black Africans.
Yeah. Even if you look at apartheid, I'd say 10 rand on education on a white child, 5 rand on a colored child, 1 rand on a black child's education. So everything was segregated. So pensions would go along the same line. White people would receive a 10 rand pension, colored people would receive 5 rand, Indians would receive 6 rand, coloreds 5 rand, and black people 1 rand.
So everything was everything was calculated and measured based on
and
race.
That's why, I mean, in the psyche of colored people, they're better than black people because they were treated better, their schooling was better, and that's why a lot of people hold on to the idea of I'm a colored, I'm not black,
Right, because of the social status.
Yes.
But nonetheless, my understanding is for colored folks, I mean, it's still apartheid, right? So as long as you're not white, you're experiencing cruelty, you're experiencing oppression. So although your experience of oppression would not have been the same as, what is, I guess, traditionally called a Black South African, because you self-identify now as a Black South African, and reject that colored label. But in growing up, you recognized that apartheid was a problem, or your family did, is that right?
Yes, did. I grew up with a family where my father was part of the anti-apartheid movement, the struggle against that. My father was a political, our political awareness started in our home, where my father, I must tell you, belonged to, in those years, remember it was underground, we would go hand out pamphlets and things, and even just if they caught you with literature, that meant it could be dangerous. And my father, in his own way, tried to protect us from not being incarcerated and those things. But he always, I had, like I said earlier, my father had a saying for us: black is beautiful and very expensive too. So it was about affirming who we are as black people, and that we valued and that we worth. However, going to my dad's work, I saw something different. My dad worked in Sea Point, and I remember Sea Point was predominantly, it was a white area. We couldn't be there after hours. You could only be there during working hours. The blacks and colored people in Sea Point were only the workers. And so having to see my hero, I go with my dad, and it was a big thing to be traveling on the bus, going to Sea Point, seeing white people was a big thing.
Right. How old were you then?
I was about 6, 7, 8,
Yeah.
And then having to go there, and then for 10, even then as a young girl, as 12, I used to also help my dad and get some pocket money.
Okay.
And then a child of 4 would turn around and call my dad Johnny. And as a culture, everybody was auntie or uncle. There was a prefix before a name.
Of respect.
Respect, yeah. And so then to turn around and watch my dad just being the boy. My dad used to leave the home with a collar and tie and a hat and his bag. And I thought my dad was very important. And then only years later, I realized that he was actually just a boy of the white people.
Pause. Caroline just mentioned that she saw her father being referred to as a boy at work. Let's break that down. One of the demeaning tenets of white supremacy is to attack one's sense of identity and agency. During that time, in South Africa and in North America, it was very common for white people to refer to black men as boys, which was intended to demean them and keep them in an inferior position compared to white men. That is, only white men could be men. What Caroline is describing is the first time she witnessed her father, who was highly respected in their household and in their community, being disrespected and degraded in white society. It clearly left a lasting impression.
My dad used to leave the home with a collar and tie and a hat and his bag. And I thought my dad was very important. And then only years later, I realized that he was actually just a boy of the white people. And so there was always almost that schizophrenic identity of who we are in our homes. And now that I'm also a gender-based violence activist, I see the oppression of our black men, of what it looked like for them during the day, then to come home. And now I see why my dad was angry. I'm not excusing his behavior in no ways, because as a feminist and also a GBV activist, but I realized what apartheid did for us as people of color, that my dad was nothing. And he was bossed around by children, by white children during the day. And then coming home, we had to keep quiet. Just last night, I said to my husband, I said to him, please don't asked me to do something. I said to him, it reminded me, and it immediately triggered me, Dr. O. I said to him, the dogs were in the room, and he said, no, when I walk into the room, the dogs shouldn't be here in the room. I said, you do not do that to me. It just reminded me of a time when my dad used to come home, and as a child, I can't be in that space because my dad needed to be quiet. And now I know what happened. And my dad, my mother used to keep us quiet in the house when my dad comes home from work. And now we had to be bathed and cleaned and quiet and sit in another room.
Because
out
he's
of the
coming
way.
with the weight of oppression
Yes.
into the home.
Yes. And now I know it. Now I get it. But still, at the age of 58, it immediately triggered me. It reminded me of what my dad was like. Oh, what we had to do to make sure that my dad felt safe. And my dad felt like he was important in the space. And I see my mother's role, even though we speak now about it as patriarchy and now women enable patriarchy, but I also see the other side of the coin of the trauma response and how my mother responded to his trauma. How she then affirmed him as his partner, as his wife, and how she made him feel like he's the king of the castle. So when he came home from work, he was in charge.
I think that's although you were speaking about, a very extreme form of racial oppression, so much of what you describe of, Black men feeling oppressed in the outside world and then coming home and at least either being affirmed or wanting to be affirmed. But then it also makes me think, and maybe I don't know if you want to speak about, your mom, right? Of the burden that ends up being for Black women, where there is that need to affirm, but then who is lifting us up because we're also carrying an oppression. So what do you want to tell us a little bit about your mom? And
so it took me years and years of therapy. It took me, firstly, I didn't think I would be crying telling you the story, but it took me years of therapy to just even understand this oppression. And for my mom died at the age of 54. My mother died of a heart attack at the age of 54, Dr. O. And I realized it was the oppression. It was almost the trauma. I mean, we have now got words for it. Right. We have over the years got terms, we've got words, research has been done, and now we know. But then there wasn't that. My mom raised her children by herself. My mom, not herself, but my dad was always out working. My dad was always, and he lived with that oppression. I mean, but in Sea Point, where he worked in the white area, there was a time when all of them had to leave the area. If it's 6 o'clock at night, you have to run for your bus because if they catch you on the road in Sea Point after that, you would get a beating. And I look at the cruelty of apartheid and just to have lived there. But for my mom, I look at her and for years I saw her and I had to understand my own psyche of why I'm so combative, why I always had this fighting spirit as a Black woman. But I always felt like I don't want to be my mom ever. My mother was the subservient, raising her children, almost apologetic for living. And I found that to be, I had to unpack that for years and think, why did she almost just blended in. She was just there. She showed love. She had no, and so remember, I'm the youngest of 9 children. So for
9?
Yes, wow. Youngest of 9. So for my older siblings, they speak of a different mother. I think by the time she got to me, she was tired. Right. She had no combativeness in her. She had no fight in her anymore. And so she had year after year. And even with having babies, there were no contraceptives for Black women. And then they were told they must use different methods, the rhythm, they had to count the calendar.
So there was contraception for white women, but not for Black women. That's interesting compared to the United States, where they wanted to give contraception to Black women to control, racial numbers.
Yes.
But Yeah, so that's interesting. So here
Yes.
they didn't provide
Because they didn't provide
contraception.
health services
Right,
much to Black
right.
people here, you know?
Yes, yes. So your mom, by this, I mean, after having 9 children, a husband who's, battling with apartheid every day and then coming home,
Mm.
um, carrying that, bringing that home. Um, so yeah, so I think, so you're saying through therapy, you're able to kind of put yourself in her shoes and start to, but when you were younger, you couldn't see it.
Yes, I couldn't see
You
it. I
couldn't see
couldn't
it.
see why she was so weak, why she was not responding almost to when my dad speaks in the house, she's quiet. I used to find that she drinks even. I mean, she used to drink alcohol during the day if she wanted to say something to my dad at night. And we always used to say, and I think that's what even my own thing with wine, I always used to find alcohol. I don't like alcohol and people who abuse alcohol. I mustn't say it in that way. I think I always find that I like to be sober because alcohol was portrayed to me in a different way.
Right, yeah.
And so for me growing up, it was difficult. And then of course, as soon as I could find my voice at about the age of 16, you would find me at the boycotts, at the stone throwing, being the cheerleader, standing on the platforms, shouting out Amandla, and so I
Sorry,
became
Amandla.
Amandla means and a way to inciting crowds and doing that. So I was always that young girl. So when something need to happen, they would say, where am I? Where my nickname is Kala. That's why I'm Kala's Foundation. And they would say, where's Kala? And I would be there, up there stoking students, with the student uprising, running ahead and doing things.
Okay, folks, coming up next, we're about to have a difficult discussion that is centered on the subjects of sexual abuse and assault and gendered violence. If these are traumatizing or distressing topics for you, please skip ahead by about 10 minutes and restart this episode at 32 minutes and 25 seconds on the timeline.
So when something need to happen, they would say, where am I? Where my nickname is Kala. That's why I'm Kala's Foundation. And they would say, where's Kala? And I would be there, up there stoking students, with the student uprising, running ahead and doing things. And so as soon as I could find my voice, then sadly something happened to me. I was gang raped. And I was gang raped, and it was 3 months before my 16th birthday.
Oh my God.
And so I still carry scars over my body, but I always say I never knew that would be the catalyst. But the same, if you're speaking health, apartheid and all those things, if I look at how it was dealt with, I always wonder, had I been, and it's still like that today, had I been a white girl, the perpetrators would have been caught,
That's usually the case, in Canada and the United States. We have cases of Black folks who have been murdered. We have Black people who have been raped. We don't, in Canada, we have missing and murdered Indigenous women, a whole report on it. Whereas, yes, the thinking is, so I have no doubt, especially if you're saying during apartheid, this happened, if you are a white girl, because that's where the saying Black Lives Matter. It's about which lives are seen as value. But I just want to pause for a second because I didn't expect you to say that, that kind of, I did not anticipate you saying sexual assault at such a young age. And I think, one, what just struck me as you said it was the fact that you were able to say something like that, whereas I didn't see you wearing the trauma of that. It looks like, I presume through therapy and time, you've worked through that, which is, I can imagine the work required to do that.
Yes.
But also what I'm thinking about is that intersectionality of both being Black and a woman, because you were finding your voice to protest against apartheid, but then sexually assaulted, I presume, was it by white?
No.
Right. So
It
by
was, yes,
black or colored or whatever.
By colored, it
right.
was
So then
colored
that,
gangsters.
correct. So within the community for which you are trying to advocate, your role as a woman or as a young girl, in fact, a young girl, created a vulnerability for you that you experienced that violence, that inflict of power in a different way from within group, that double jeopardy of dealing with both the violence of racism and the violence of patriarchy. And that, I can only imagine, must have been so difficult to grapple with. We don't have to dive into that, but I just, for our listeners, wanted to unpack that for a moment. And so at the moment you find your voice, you experience violence. How did you come, because now it didn't, for some people that's the end of activism, but you stand today as a woman, an activist, and who supports women. So can you tell me how one does that?
So Dr. Onye, you know, it's been a long journey. I mean, this happened, if I look now, it was 42 years on July the 20th. It was 42 years ago. But like you say, it took years of work. It took lots of work. When that happened, I did not realize I would be here 42 years later as one of the biggest gender-based violence activists in South Africa. I can call myself that. So the GBV space, we just come from a presidential summit, GBV summit here in South Africa. And if you ask about, so that is why I do the work that I do. I did not realize what happened to me at the age of 16 was going to be what I do now. And why and that is why, you know, many times people say, oh, you're still at it. People that's worked in the space, left the space, come back and and then say, are you still doing this work? And that's why I'm passionate about doing this work that no other Black girl at 16 years old must go through. I have been fortunate to be part of legislation. So as civil society building legislation in this country around the Domestic Violence Act, the Sexual Offences Bill. I've been part of civil society in the Trafficking in Persons Act, Sexual Harassment Act. And so how did I do this? Sure, it took a lot. I did not get here overnight. I went through a dip. I then stopped. By the age of a month before my 18th birthday, I had my first daughter. That's why my daughter is 40 years old and I'm only 58 years old. I went on a path of drugs. Therefore, I work on the intersections of drugs, gender-based violence, and women in conflict with the law. I run a program for UNODC advocating for non-custodial measures for women in conflict with the law because I have had a journey. A long life journey. I don't think our 30 minutes is enough to
we might have to do more, but yes. Let's tap into some of that journey. So you're saying that after the assault, then later on, shortly after that, you did become pregnant.
Yes.
And then after that, sometime after that, you started to use drugs, I guess, to numb the pain and the trauma.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And then
and I want to say too, so the typical, I mean, if you look at the textbook, rape survivor or rape victim, some people want to be called victims and other survivors, and we know it's a mode of that we're in. But as a rape survivor, the typical promiscuity, drugs to numb the pain. And then at the age of 21, I was married with 2 children. I met a decent man. For the first time, when I met a man, a colored man, in fact, that did not want me for sex, but that saw me. I fell in love with this man and we got married. And that was my first husband. We had, I'm speaking deep things. I didn't know I was going to come speak this deep things here. And we fell in love. We had two children together and my daughters. So at 21, I was married, 2 children. And then from there, in fact, then I became a rape crisis volunteer. I became a rape crisis volunteer But I worked in the corporate sector as a bookkeeper and office manager.
Okay.
I studied that. And then the rape crisis ad, one day while I'm working in the corporate sector, came across my desk in the newspaper that they're looking for volunteers. And all of a sudden, boom. But I want to tell you, at the age of 22, I had my first breakdown. I ended up in a clinic because I never ever spoke, never went into counseling, just continued with life. At the end of age of 22, life caught up with me. And I went into a clinic called Kenilworth Clinic for depression, manic depression. In fact, that time they didn't call it bipolar, they call it manic depression.
Yes.
And Dr. Ramsey Carlson was the first man of color psychiatrist I know, because I was always aware of black.
Right.
And I looked up a psychiatrist that was black, and he was the only man. And even though he wasn't black as in African black, to me he was black enough, besides the white people. And I'm always aware of black, doctor, I must tell you. Whether it's services I have in any way, I'm black aware.
Yes.
And so I sought him out. He saw me, and immediately he placed me into a clinic. And that, for the first time, I started dealing at the age of 22 with my rape, with everything else. At the age of 6, I just want to tell you, my mother found out that I was sexually abused in our home. She took me home and she told me not to tell my dad. And now I understand that she was scared of my dad, of what happened to me. Yes.
So you had been sexually assaulted
at the age of 6 by a cousin. That was 19 years old. I learned about why I don't eat vanilla ice cream during therapy, because we were poor and vanilla ice cream was a thing, and he worked at a factory and he used to come home with that. But we're drifting over the race issue. But
it's all
they
connected
all
because
intersect.
exactly. This is oppression, and these are the things that happen to Black women.
Yes.
And we say that's not part of race, but we are Black women.
Yes.
And this is part of that intersectional double jeopardy of being a Black woman. And you're, so that is all part of your humanity and is consequence of apartheid as well. But I just wanted to ask, where you said you were 22 and then you had that breakdown, had you already started to volunteer in the sexual assault center? Okay. So it was after that. Okay. So you had therapy, and then you were able to put the pieces together between 6 years old and the sexual assault. And and this is after the manic depression or the bipolar episode. So then how is it in that process now of turning pain to purpose? Is this where the switch turns?
That's when the switch turns, when I go into therapy, and I spend a few years in therapy at the age of 28. At the age of 28.
So that's hard. That's work. Yes. You put in work from 22 to 28. Yes. You're doing the work to unpack the trauma, deal with it, and then turn it to purpose. Yes. Okay. So then from 28.
It was work, it was drugs, it was drinking too much, and then discovering that we change our one drug of choice to another, understanding addiction, going off medication, being a benzo addict, and then going to an alcoholic addict, and then going to the chemical dependency unit at the clinic. So it was years from going through a bipolar to going to the chemical dependency unit at Kenilworth Clinic. And it was all, different units, different work, different times of my life. And what happened at the age of 27, my husband has an affair with my best friend. And so, of course, he played a huge part in almost stabilizing me. And then that is no longer there. And that's when I went into the chemical dependency unit, because I drink more and
right.
And then arrived
you've lost your anchor. You've lost your anchor.
Yes.
And it looked like, love helped to sustain. You know what I mean? Revive you, and then now you lost that. Okay. Yes. So then
28 I go CDU, chemical dependency unit, and once I'm out of that, I realized that I need to change my whole lifestyle. I'm without a husband. And if I don't do this, I'm going to die. I'm going to end up, dying in other ways in my life. And for one day at work, I see the advert for rape crisis volunteers. And I'll never forget, I apply, and I think, these people are not going to take me because, I'm still so broken. And then I realized that the activist in me, activist in me then comes to the front, and I just have a great interview, and they said, yes, I'm on the course, and the course is for a year every Saturday.
You just gave me goosebumps because you said you just entered the room, and it just, like, the way you just said it just feels like the ancestors was with you, or the spirit of you. Like, you know what I mean? Your voice came back.
Yes.
That voice that had been always there but suppressed, told to be quiet.
Yes.
In many different ways, in violent ways, told to be quiet, comes out. Oh, wow.
In a safe space.
Yes.
Because now you walk into a room and you realize this is a safe space, and I want to be a part of the safe space. And I mean, now, Dr. O, I speak about safe spaces. Are you a safe person? I teach people I facilitate training on being a safe person, and,
Yes.
And that was all new to me. I was doing figures and accounting and all that.
You were working in a corporate space. You said, wow, that's the opposite of this.
Yeah.
I'm with
and
you.
so coming into the space, and from wearing a suit to wearing jeans and khakis and T-shirts, slogans. So it was a whole new world. And I walk into that space and I become a rape crisis volunteer. And so, of course, we spend a year. Every Saturday, I'm in the Rape Crisis Center, and we have our class, and just being together there. And I loved it so much. And then I work in the corporate, and that feeds my soul, and I grow in that space. 1999, there's a position that opens up at Sarki Batman Center.
Okay, and this is now post. You said 1999, so apartheid ends.
Apartheid ends
1994.
94, where I vote for the first time. Remember, so now, I mean, you wanted to be a part of South Africa. 1991. In February, when Madiba was, I call him Madiba, that's my affectionate
Nelson
Mandela's release. The Saturday night, we're busy preparing because as a movement, we know he's coming out tomorrow. But my husband is not an activist like I am. And so, it becomes a problem. This is still the husband.
Oh, dear. Okay.
And so, of course, he says to me, you can only go if you take the child with, and I know there's going to be huge crowds. And I said, yes, I will go, and I'm not taking you. And I said, I will go. This is history. And I go with my child on my shoulders, and we walk for kilometers to get there. I see this. And there they start rioting, and police start shooting, and we have to duck and dive. And I think, oh my goodness, this man will kill me if anything happens to my child, because he didn't want me to come.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was there. I was there the day before Madiba was even released. Remember, they unbanned the ANC, driving through Sea Point, the same place where we couldn't walk after 6 at night with our ANC flags and waving the flag.
The area where your dad worked.
Where my dad worked, yes. I was there on that day sitting on buckies with our flags, I said to them the other day, I was telling them when my daughter, when they opened the schools in 91, my daughter was in grade 3, and they just announced schools are now open for every color.
Right.
So there's
no
longer segregated. The next time there at the school registering my daughter, and very defiant, political colors on, and I have my ANC colors on because now I'm allowed to wear my ANC colors publicly.
Oh, and let's say ANC is African National Congress. That was Mandela's party, political party. Yes.
And so, of course, they accept my child with 4 black mothers. And they accept our children, and this defiance, our children is coming to the school. And
Wow.
So I lived through that too.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I wanted to make a difference. And that's why in 1999, when I switched from, by then I'm divorced, when I switched from corporate to, when I switched from the corporate to the rape crisis or civil society, I was earning $15,000 at the time. I will never forget. in corporate.
Okay.
And then at Sarki Bartman Center, they said they really, really want to employ me, but they can only afford 5,000. Am I prepared to take this? And all I'm thinking is, how are we going to survive?
That's
Here I
30%
am,
of you.
30% of my salary. And I thought, how am I going to do this? And I said yes to the job.
Wow.
I said yes. And I said, well, God, you're going to have to do miracles here.
So that is, I mean, that's huge sacrifice to go from a corporate job to a community-based job. I mean, I've heard people taking, a 30% hit, but that's a 60% hit.
That was,
and so, I mean, can you tell us about the Sarki Bartman Center? Like, what about it made you want to take a 60% salary hit as a single mom?
Yes, yes.
Please do tell.
So Sarki Bartman is, for me, the epitome of what happens to Black women. So Sarki Bartman was taken on a ship to Europe. She was a Khoisan woman that we call the indigenous people. Her anatomy was big. So remember in those days, they didn't...
And which days? What year are we talking
I'm
here?
talking about the early 1900s.
Early 1900s, okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were still walking around with not lots of clothes. Women wouldn't wear bras, but they would have those pieces of the cloth, loincloths and those things. And Sarki's genitalia were very big, was enlarged.
Right. She had a large backside, right? Like
she had large buttocks,
right.
She had large vagina, and it was almost protruding, and large bums, like backsides. And so she was at one point, and then, of course, the ships that came across the Cape Colony, Cape Town, she would be paraded on ships. She would be used as a prostitute. She would be sold from one ship to another. She would be sold.
So she was abducted.
She was abducted here from South Africa, taken to Europe on a ship. She died of syphilis eventually. From all of the sexual assaults.
She got a sexually transmitted infection, which she died from. That is so completely dehumanized. That's again, as a woman, as a Black woman.
Yes. And then she died over there. She was displayed in a museum in France. Her remains eventually was taken down as requested by South African government. As activists, even older than me, became more. The Diana Ferris was very instrumental. Dr. Yvette Abrams, they are now retired Black activists, women from University of the Western Cape. They wrote to the French government, got her remains off the display, and then they packed it away. Diana Ferris went over there, went to their parliament, spoke in their parliament, got the remains back. What it means for us. This was early 2000s when she was returned.
Her remains were on display in France up until the early 2000s.
Up until the late 90s. What? It was taken down. Yes, it was taken down.
Oh my God.
We then received it here in about 2002. We buried her and gave her a dignified burial. She got 4 colors when her remains arrived here. Got the salute. We were all there. It was a huge moment for us.
Pause. We have to have a moment of silence for Miss Sarki Bartman, also known as Sarah Bartman. As Caroline noted, she was a South African woman and the victim of the human zoo craze that was prominent in Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. Ms. Bartman was exhibited and paraded as a freak show attraction in 19th century Europe under the name Hot and Taut Venus, where people would stare at her prominent buttocks as a spectacle. She is a historical and international example of the sexualization, colonial exploitation, and dehumanization of Black bodies, in particular, Black female bodies. She was marketed as the, quote, missing link between man and beast, end quote. In London and Paris, Miss Bartman was often treated like an animal. As Caroline described, after her death, her remains were preserved and put on display in France. In 1994, the African National Congress in South Africa petitioned for her remains to be returned, and after much resistance from France, her remains were repatriated to her homeland in 2002. Can we have a moment of silence for the life of this Black woman and others like her who are still unnamed in our history books? Thank you.
And then she died over there. She was displayed in a museum in France. Her remains eventually was taken down as requested by South African government. As activists, even older than me, became more. The Diana Ferris was very instrumental. Dr. Yvette Abrams, they are now retired Black activists, women from University of the Western Cape. They wrote to the French government, got her remains off the display, and then they packed it away. Diana Ferris went over there, went to their parliament, spoke in their parliament, got the remains back.
When was
what
this?
it means for us. This was early 2000s when she was returned.
Her remains were on display in France up until the early
Up until
2000s.
up until the late 90s.
What?
It was taken down. Yes, it was taken down.
Oh my God.
We then received it here in about 2002. We buried her and gave her a dignified burial. She got full colors when her remains arrived here, got the salute. We were all there. It was a huge moment for us.
Wow. So the center is named after
The
her.
center is named after her.
And what does the
Yes.
center do?
The center is a safe space. It runs a shelter for women and children.
Mm.
It can house up to 100 women and children.
Oh, wow.
It runs programs, job skills, so women that flees violent relationships. One thing of Cape Town and the Cape Flats is the gangsterism. So if we speak about, I was raped by a gang here from the Cape Flats, so violence, lots of violence on women here on the Cape Flats. And so it's based in the Cape Flats where women flee from violent relationships. We have job skills programs. There's food-based planting, a garden program where organic food is planted by Abalimi. There's schools programs. So there's social workers who works at school, outreach programs.
Okay.
There's access to justice programs so women can come and seek legal help. Yeah.
Okay. And so you led that. So you became the director?
Yeah, I was the director for the Western Cape Network on Violence Against Women.
Okay.
So I want to tell you, Sarki Bartman Center is made up of many different civil society organizations.
Oh, so it's a network.
Yes, it's a network. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But doing the work to save women from these,
yes,
from the violence. And so with that work, engaging in activism, being more known on the national stage. And so you go from the corporate job, take this job on, and with it, does your voice become amplified? Do you
definitely
kind of step into your power through that? Is that what happened? Were you able to feed your children even though you took a 60% pay hit? Do you want to kind of speak a little bit? Because this sounds a little bit like what we talk about, that surthrival. It's not just survival, but it looks like you thrived. How did you thrive?
Sure. If I think now back, Dr. O, then I think, like I said to you, my last daughter has just finished 5 years of studies.
Yes.
And she is she's now a professional nurse.
Congratulations.
So, yes, thank you. So those are the things that's happened.
Okay.
The other day
So you've been fortunate of things that have happened.
Yes, and not that, and living by faith. I want to say living by faith, almost paying it forward, doing things. I said the other night, I had an ex-colleague that phoned me that said to me she wants to make a donation to Carla's Foundation. And I said, for how much? And she says, no, 150,000. And I said, what? She said, I know the work that you do. And I see you, my sister. And I got onto money. So this is a white woman.
Oh, wow.
So I want to tell you also, we didn't even get to speak about my journey with white women in the sector. And this was my first director when I stepped into the sector. And me and her said, we must speak about it, because I was a huge challenge to her to manage, because when I walked into the sector, I was much older than her, but I had this young white woman that was my boss. I fought her every step of the way, and what that meant to me and us and our relationship. When she left the Network on Violence Against Women, I think I gave her so much hell. I felt like, why am I being subjected to this all over in civil society? Yeah. But we have found each other. We have reconciled. She's not the white apologist. She's not the white savior. And all those things
she's the person who had been your boss then, that you gave hell, and now you're friends.
We are friends. We speak about it openly. But white women must know they must come into the space not as white saviors, not be white apologists and be condescending and patronizing. I hate it. I almost have a hate for it. The white woman, sit down, I want to say, if you want to come and think you're coming to save us. We are the ones we've been waiting for,
Pause. Caroline just said, if white women think they're coming to save us, they should sit down. We are the solutions we are looking for. I actually have nothing to add to that. I just wanted to make sure you heard it.
But white women must know they must come into the space not as white saviors, not be white apologists and be condescending and patronizing. I hate it. I almost have a hate for it. The white woman, sit down, I want to say, if you want to come and think you're coming to save us. We are the ones we've been waiting for,
Yes.
So Carla's Foundation was established because Sarki Batman Center is based a little bit outside. So it's within the Cape Flats, but then Carla's Foundation was founded in the area that I live and work and where my parents, where I was born.
Right.
So,
and it's Callas, spelled
Callas.
Okay,
Callas Foundation.
And you're the director.
And I'm the founder, director. We run Access to Justice, because we've also seen and realized that, we speak about privilege.
Yes.
Women have the difference between taxi fare going to find services or walking there is a thing for women. We often overlook, even me and you sitting here, this is privilege.
Yes.
And we forget our sisters on the ground at times. But I'm always very mindful of everything I do. And that's why Carla's Foundation is based in the community. It will help women. So daily we feed women, because we cannot speak about intersectionality. Then we cannot overlook the poverty that still exists in our communities, So there's food. And if you look at, just a simple example, I've got so much to tell you, but a woman stands in the queue crying, please, can you dish the food separate? Not the food, the rice separate to the stew. And I say, and now I'm sitting in my office and I can hear this, and I go out, and of course, the women who dish is not as wise as I am, and I can hear the trauma in her voice. And she comes and she says to me, he's going to eat me if he's going to know that I found the food at a feeding scheme if it's served like this, because he said I must go out and find food for us, but not food from a feeding scheme. So she wanted the food dish separately so
because
that it
looked like she
cooked it. Wow. Women have been extracted from kitchens, has become in community since COVID. Kitchens has become almost a hub in communities. We have now even educated the chefs and the cooks and the dishes all as GBV first responders.
Wow.
Yeah, so how do I identify women in the queue? How do we
how do you identify the women who are at risk?
Yes,
and
women
most
at risk.
vulnerable?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
And so they now have support groups in their kitchens. They have that.
And kitchens, these are like in
community kitchens.
Soup kitchens where you go for
yes,
discounted or free food.
Yes.
And that's where they identify the women.
Yes,
okay. But the cooks and the staff are trained to identify the women at risk. And connect them with like your center.
Correct.
Oh,
yes.
That's fantastic.
So that is what Kalas Foundation do. We're really a community-based organization, access to justice for women. So women come to our center. We have at Kalas Foundation, come there. There's a lawyer that comes once a week that will assist you with legal work. We have now found out a loophole with women out to get the houses back from the city of Cape Town that was previously, because of patriarchy, it was registered in men's name only. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So we found there was a matter now in court, so all those things. And that is what Kalas Foundation do. Psychosocial support, access to justice. Sure. Yeah. And amongst many other things.
And
Dr. I can speak for hours still, but yeah.
And I hope that we have a chance to speak again, because it is a phenomenal story of the birth of a voice, the suppression of the voice, finding voice again. But then it looks to me like you are giving so many women their voice.
Yes.
And so that is a beautiful thing. And with that, I guess a way that we could zoom in on actually a nice, beautiful story of truth and reconciliation between you and your white colleague who had been your younger white boss and very problematic. But then later through her journey of learning and your own journey of forgiveness coming together, and then her giving a donation. So I think there's so many lessons for us to learn here. I want to thank you for being my guest. There's one last question I ask all of my guests. What brings you joy?
Helping another sister.
Helping another sister.
Helping another sister. Seeing what brings me joy is a sister that phones when I see I've just taken sisters through training. And when I see the personal growth, when I do the river of life and they get it, I do the river of life.
River of life?
River of life is even before I train you on gender-based violence. So we look at our own traumas. We do not have uncomfortable conversations about our past. We cannot continue working as if we come. People do not unpack their past first before they jump into wanting to help others. I've seen it with this work. Hurt people. And so for me, we just graduated 32 women on Friday.
Oh, wow.
And if I see the women on Friday was different to when I saw them 6 months ago.
Because they've dealt with their trauma.
They've dealt.
Hurt people, but people who are well can help other people be well.
Yes.
Oh, that is beautiful. That is joy.
Yes.
Thank you for being my guest. Thank you for the wisdom. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And just for you too.
Yeah,
be well.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast was created by Dr. Onye Norum, and she's our host. I'm Dr. Carl Cabasel, executive producer of the show. Our technical producer is Obadiah George. Our showrunner is Cam, and JL Joseph is associate producer. Promotions coordinator is Jordan Gibson, and Javiera Violeta Duran Quieres is our logistics coordinator. Tamika E. Latibaudiere is our research consultant, and Corinne Bent Womack is our anti-racism consultant. Our student associate producers are Xavier Oshinowo and Afia McIntosh. Veronica Ng is our graphic design consultant, and the RHH theme song is composed and performed by Gold Keys. Special thanks to Awit Siem and Darrell Carpentier for their voiceover work. Do you have questions, feedback, ideas to share? We would love to hear from you. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at RaceHealth&Happy, and check out the show notes for research that was referenced in this episode, as well as other bonus material. Our website is RaceHealth&Happiness.com. Thank you for listening to Race, Health, and Happiness, and please subscribe to us anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. This is Dr. Carl. On behalf of the whole RHH team, we'll talk with you soon.
The Race, Health and Happiness podcast is brought to you with help from Toronto Metropolitan University and with support from subscribers and listeners like you. Overcome the obstacles of racism while staying happy and healthy. Donate today at patreon.com/racehealthhappy. We are learning together to thrive. Thank you for your support. The Race, Health and Happiness podcast is made better by the skills, knowledge, and creative passion of the journalism students who work right here on the show. These students join us from Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you for the hard work, folks. We appreciate you.